Officers only past this line, sweetheart. This is a United States submarine, not a tour. You're at the wrong pier. The words rolled down the brow before she reached the end of it. Chief Petty Officer Dale Stroud stood square in the middle of the gangway, boots planted, one hand resting on the rail, like a man who owned the steel under it. Behind him, the black hole of a fast-attack submarine lay long and low against the pier, 400 feet of it, sun-warmed and freshly painted for the afternoon. 800 feet of pier. One brow. One woman who had walked every inch of it without hurrying. She wore dark slacks and a weathered windbreaker the color of wet slate. One bag over her shoulder. No rank on her. No badge clipped to her collar. No lanyard. Nothing that told a watchstander who she was or why she was there. She stopped at the painted line on the concrete, 2 paces short of the brow, and she did not argue. She looked at the boat instead. Her eyes moved before her feet did, and they moved in an order. The brow first, the safety chain hanging slack off one stanchion, a single hook unseated. The shore power cable next, led across a cleat at the wrong angle, the heavy lead chafing where it crossed the steel. The topside watch last, a young petty officer at the head of the brow with a sidearm at his hip, the retention strap on the holster hanging open. She catalogued all 3 the way another person might count their own breaths, without effort, without showing it. Stroud read the silence as confusion and grinned. "You hearing me? English working for you?" He half-turned to the 2 sailors topside, a petty officer and a seaman, and lifted his chin at the woman like she was the morning's entertainment. "Happens twice a month. Yard rep gets turned around, ends up on the wrong pier, thinks every black boat's the same boat." He turned back. "There's a trailer down at Pier 2. That's where the contractors check in. Behind the line, ma'am. Behind the line." The woman stepped back, 1 pace, deliberate, until both her heels were behind the painted stripe on the concrete. She set her bag down at her feet. She straightened. Then, for the first time, she looked at Stroud directly, not at the boat, at the man. And there was nothing in her face at all. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Not the flustered apology a lost civilian wears. Just a flat, level attention. The kind of person aims at a problem they have already solved and are merely waiting to watch unfold. It should have cooled him. It did not. Stroud had stood this brow for the better part of 2 years. He ran the topside watch the way some men run a small kingdom. Every face checked against his own opinion first, and the rules second. Juniors kept sharp by being kept small. The quarterdeck arranged so that nothing crossed his deck he had not personally approved. He was good at the parts of the job that could be performed. He had decided what this woman was inside 4 seconds, and he was a man who did not revisit a decision once it had been made in front of an audience. "You can wait if you want," he said, magnanimous now, playing the line to the 2 sailors above him. "But the only thing happening on this pier today is Navy business. Real Navy business." He let the word real sit there a moment, pleased with it. The morning smelled of brine and diesel and fresh paint. Gulls worked the gap between the boat and the pier. Somewhere down the waterfront, a crane swung a load, and the chain sang. The submarine waited, rigged and quiet, for an afternoon that would change its command. She had come down the pier on foot, from the far end, where the staff cars parked. She had passed the line handlers and the shore power shed and the long row of mooring cleats, and she had not stopped once, and she had not looked lost for a single step of it, because she was not. A person who belongs on a waterfront walks a waterfront a particular way, eyes up, pace even, reading the boats the way a farmer reads a field. She had walked it like that the whole 800 feet. The only person on the pier who had failed to notice was the one man whose entire job that morning was to notice. There was a stillness to her that the brine and the gulls and the singing crane could not touch. It was the stillness of a person who had decided, a long time before this morning, that the world would show you what it was if you only had the patience to let it, and that almost no one had the patience. The woman behind the line did not check her watch. She wore it. The audience would have noticed if anyone had been close enough to see. Face turned inward toward her wrist, the way people wear them who have spent careers in places where a glint of light at the wrong second cost something. She did not check it because she did not need to. She knew exactly how much time there was. She had built her whole morning around having more of it than anyone expected. "Suit yourself," Stroud said, when she gave him nothing back. He turned away, satisfied, and called something up to the topside watch about squaring away a line. She stood behind the line in the sun, bag at her feet, and watched his boat the way a doctor watches a patient who does not yet know he is sick. The brow chain was still off the stanchion. She let it be. For now. There would be a right moment to mention it. This was not it. The first thing you learned, in the life she had actually led, and the one she wore over it like the windbreaker, was that the right moment was a weapon, and you did not spend a weapon early to win a small thing from a small man. So she waited, and Chief Stroud, certain he had won the morning, went back to running his kingdom. 800 feet of pier, one brow, and a woman he had already forgotten was standing there. He would remember her. Everyone on that pier would. But not yet. The hatch at the top of the brow swung, and a different man came up into the light. Master Chief Petty Officer Abel Quinto had been in the Navy for 30 years, and most of those years had been spent under the water, in steel, learning to tell the difference between a thing that was wrong and a thing that only looked wrong. He came up through the hatch and onto the top side and took the whole picture in one slow pass before he said a word to anyone. The boat, the brow, his chief, the two juniors, the contractor and the windbreaker behind the line on the pier. Quinto had buried 2 shipmates and trained 400 sailors and stood more watches than he could count. And the thing all of it had given him was an instrument in the chest that went off when a picture did not add up. The picture in front of him did not add up. The pieces were ordinary. A chief, a brow, a civilian turned around on the wrong pier. But they were arranged wrong, the way a compartment is arranged wrong in the half-second before you understand what is missing from it. 30 years had taught the Master Chief one thing above all. The dangerous ones were quiet. His eyes went back to the woman. There was a stillness to her that did not belong to a person who was lost. Lost people fidgeted. They looked for someone to fix it. They held their phones up and frowned at maps. This one stood like she had stood in a great many places, where standing still and saying nothing was the correct and only thing to do. And she did it with the ease of long practice. Quinto came down the brow a few steps and stopped where he could see her better. "Morning," he said. "Master Chief," she answered. "Just the title." "Correct. Given the way you give a fact, not a greeting." He noted that she had read his collar device from 20 feet in shade and named it without looking like she had looked. He noted the watch, worn inward. He noted that her hands were loose and still at her sides. "Chief's got you behind the line," Quinto said. Mild, feeling his way. "He does. You waiting on someone?" "I'm expected," she said. That was all. Not by whom. Not for what. Stroud, hearing the Master Chief give the woman the time of day, drifted over with the easy contempt of a man who believed seniority lived in his own opinions. "She's a yard rep, Master Chief. Turned around. I've handled it." The woman did not look at Stroud. She looked at the boat, and she spoke to both of them in a voice that was flat and brief and entirely without heat. "Your brow chain's off the stanchion," she said. "Your shore cable's chafing a live lead, where it crosses the forward cleat. And your topside watch is standing with an open holster. A small pause. 2 of those will hurt somebody. 1 of them will hurt somebody today. For a moment, no one spoke. Stroud laughed, but it came a half-second late. "Everybody's an inspector," he said. Quinto did not laugh. Quinto turned his head and looked, actually looked, the way the woman had in the order she had given them. The chain was off the stanchion. The cable was chafing. The seaman at the head of the brow had a holster hanging open at his hip. "Fix the strap," Quinto said. "Now." The seaman looked down, startled, and snapped the retention closed with a small, hard click that carried in the quiet. A petty officer moved without being told and reseated the brow chain on its hook. The cable would take a work party. Quinto filed it. He turned back to the woman. She had read his boat from behind a line in 4 sentences, and every word of it had been true. "What's your name?" the Master Chief asked. "Halverson," she said. The surname only. And then, because he had earned that much, and not a word more. "I'm expected at 1300. I'm early." Quinto held her eyes a moment longer. Then he stepped back up the brow to his watch station, and he did not go below. And he did not stop watching her, the way a man watches weather coming over the water, while the chief beside him went on narrating a victory he had already, though he did not know it, lost. The morning wore on, and Chief Stroud made the woman behind the line into a story he told the pier. Crew came and went across the brow, sailors in blue coveralls and ball caps, a working party hauling cased stores up from a truck, a yeoman with a clipboard. To each cluster of them, Stroud gave a small nod toward the painted line and a low word, and the laughter would start, and the woman would become, for 30 seconds, the lost tour lady, the contractor who couldn't read a pier number, the morning's easy joke. She gave them nothing to feed on. That, somehow, fed them more. She tried the right channel anyway. She tried it in the right words. "Request permission to come aboard," she said, when Stroud passed within earshot. "Or call your officer of the deck and tell him the party's early." Stroud stopped, delighted. "The party. You hear that?" He spread the joke to the seaman like a man handing out cigarettes. "Sweetheart, the only party you're getting is a ride back to the main gate. Permission to come aboard." He shook his head. Where do they learn the words? Where do they learn the words? She had learned them on a boat a great deal louder and a great deal closer to death than this one. But she did not say that. She let him have it. That was the part the watch could not read, and the part that mattered most. She was not failing to answer him. She was choosing not to. There is a kind of restraint that looks, from the outside, exactly like weakness, and it takes a trained eye to tell the two apart. And Chief Stroud did not have a trained eye. He had a loud one. He saw a woman taking his abuse and called it proof he was right, when in fact he was watching a senior officer decide, second by second, that he was not yet worth correcting. Lieutenant Junior Grade Wes Calloway, the officer of the deck, put his head up through the hatch then, drawn by the noise. He was 26, new to the boat, and he had the instinct, not yet beaten out of him, that a civilian at the brow asking for the OOD was a thing the OOD should hear about. "Chief, something I should—" "Got it, sir," Stroud said, fast and smooth, stepping into the line of sight, turning the young officer back with the ease of long practice. "Lost contractor. Already called it in. No need." And Calloway, who did not yet know which of the chief's certainties to trust and which to check, hesitated and went back below. A small theft. The OOD had a right to that decision, and the chief had taken it from him without his noticing. The woman noticed. She took out her phone. Not to call, to note. The time. the names stenciled on the ball caps as they crossed. The seaman's holster open again now that the Master Chief's eyes were elsewhere. The working party crossing the brow without a single one of them being checked against any list. She held the phone the way a tourist holds a phone, and the watch read it as a tourist holding a phone, and she let them. If you have ever felt your jaw tighten watching a decent person made small by a small man with a little authority and a large opinion of it, then you already understand the engine of this story, and you should stay on the pier with us, because Chief Stroud is not winning this morning. He is building something, brick by careful brick, with every word and every shortcut, and every name he does not check. He is building his own court-martial. Subscribe and watch him lay the last brick himself. She lowered the phone. The chain was back on the stanchion. The holster was open again. And the morning kept moving toward 1300. By mid-morning, the chief stopped merely ignoring her and started papering her. He went to the topside phone and called the base quarterdeck, and the audience heard him inflate the whole thing for the record as he spoke. "Yeah, got a civilian down here on the pier, won't take no for an answer. Refusing to clear. Send somebody to walk her off before the ceremony." A pause. "No threat, just send somebody." He hung up, pleased. He had made her, on a recorded line, a problem requiring removal. Then he did the thing that mattered. He pulled the topside access log onto the small shelf by the watch station, and he signed it. The audience saw what the signature covered. Names entered for the morning's traffic that he had never checked against any identification. A working party crossed and logged as screened that no one had screened. A line at the bottom for a contractor van, expected, that he initialed in advance of its arrival, because initialing it now was faster than checking it later. The woman watched his hands over the rail. The primary read again, the boat before the man, the document before the face. She said nothing. She was learning his morning the way she had learned his boat. Quinto, uneasy in a way he could not yet name, came down a step. "You check that list against the change of command manifest, Chief?" The manifest was the real list, the vetted one, the names cleared to be on his pier today. The two should match. "I've been running this brow since you had a full head of hair, Master Chief," Stroud said, and a couple of the juniors smirked because they knew they were supposed to. "I've got it. That's not what I asked." "I've got it," Stroud said again, flatter, and turned his shoulder. And that was the end of it, because he had decided it was. Quinto's jaw set. He did not have the authority of his own certainty yet, only the weight of it. He looked at the woman behind the line, at her stillness, at the inward-turned watch, and he looked at the way his chief was running the most basic security function on the boat as a personal convenience, and the two pictures would not sit comfortably together in his head. Base security did not come. They were tied up at the far end of the waterfront with something of their own, and the pier stayed as it was. Stroud, annoyed his removal had not materialized, walked over to the line one more time. "You're this close," he told the woman, holding up 2 fingers a sliver apart. "This close to getting trespassed off a federal installation. You understand that? That goes on a record." "I understand records," she said. He could not tell if it was agreement or warning, and it bothered him for exactly 2 seconds, and then a contractor van rolled up the pier toward the brow and gave him something to be in charge of. A van across a controlled brow was not a small thing, and every sailor on that boat had been taught why. The whole reason a watch stood at the head of a brow at all was the line between the pier and the boat, the line that said this far and no farther without being checked, without being known, without being matched against a list that someone with authority had vetted. The list existed because the alternative had a long and terrible history, written in other navies and other mornings. A chief who waved a vehicle across that line on his own opinion was not saving anyone time. He was spending on convenience, the one thing the watch existed to protect. The van stopped at the foot of the gangway, magnetic sign on the door, a company name, a driver in a polo shirt. Stroud did not walk to it. He did not ask the driver for identification. He did not check the van against the manifest the Master Chief had asked about twice. He waved it across, a flat, lazy sweep of the hand, the same gesture he had used to wave the woman behind a line. And the van's cargo crossed onto the controlled space of a United States submarine, on nothing but Chief Dale Stroud's opinion that it was fine. Behind the line, the woman raised her phone and quietly, without hurry, photographed the plate. Master Chief Quinto could not shake it, and finally he stopped trying to. He came down off the brow, off his watch station, deliberately, a thing a chief of the boat does not do lightly, and he crossed the few feet of pier and stood beside the woman, behind the line, the two of them looking at the same boat from the same wrong side of a painted stripe. He did not ask her for identification. He had decided, somewhere in the last hour, that identification was not the question. "You've stood topside before," he said. "More than topside. Where'd you qualify?" "A long time ago," she said. "On a boat a lot louder than this one." "Louder. Older. Smaller. We earned every fathom." She let her eyes travel the hull again, and this time the look had something in it that was almost tenderness, the way you look at a hard thing you survived. "You take care of this one. It's a good boat under a bad morning." Quinto felt the floor of his certainty tilt, and then settle somewhere new. She kept talking, unforced, and the words she used were the exact words. Not the words a contractor learns. The weapons, shipping hatch, rig the brow. The one MC. She read his collar device back to him and the 30 years behind it, in a single sentence, the way only someone who had worn the equivalent could, and she did it without any edge at all, simply naming what was true, the way she had named the chain and the cable and the holster. "You came down off your watch station to stand behind a line with a stranger," she went on, still quiet, still without edge. "There's only two kinds of people who do that, Master Chief. The ones who want something, and the ones who already know something's wrong and can't make themselves walk away from it." "Which are you betting I am?" Quinto said. "I don't bet on a boat," she said. "I read it, the same way you do. You've been reading me for an hour, and you don't like the answer. Because the answer means your chief has been wrong all morning in a way that's going to cost him." She paused. "It already has. He just doesn't know it yet." "Master Chief," she said, "your chief has spent the morning telling everyone what I'm not. Nobody's asked what I am, including you. I've noticed you're the only one who hasn't needed to." Quinto looked at the slack way Stroud was running the brow, the open holster, the van across the line, the log signed on nothing. Then he looked at the woman's composure, at the stillness that 30 years told him only came from one kind of life. And the thought arrived in him fully formed, in the genre's old plain language. If she is who your gut says she is, Master Chief, then the only person in trouble on this pier this morning is the one wearing a chief's anchors. "I'm going to go find the manifest," Quinto said slowly, "and the real access list. Myself." "Take your time, Master Chief," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." He almost smiled. He didn't. He turned for the brow, and then he turned back, and the apology was in his voice, even though the words were only about the boat. "It'll be squared away shortly, ma'am. The boat. I'll see to it." "I know you will," she said. "That's the difference between you and the chief. So ask yourself, before we go below the waterline for the answer, who walks the full 800 feet of a pier in a windbreaker to stand quietly behind a line drawn in paint by a man she could end with one telephone call, and waits? Who chooses that? There is a reason, and it is not weakness, and it is the whole of who she is. Stay aboard. Subscribe. The answer to that question is the heart of this story, and it lives, like the best of her, below the surface. Quinto went down the hatch to pull the manifest. The woman stayed behind the line, and the morning held its breath. To understand why she could stand behind a painted line all morning and not need the uniform to be obeyed, you have to go back to the night the sea tried to take a boat out from under her, and very nearly did. That morning she had a packed sea bag waiting in a guest cabin across the base, and in the bag, in a flat case, a set of gold dolphins. Folded beside them, a set of orders with her name typed plainly across the top. Captain Tessa Halverson, United States Navy. Reporting as Commodore, Submarine Squadron 8. 48 years old, 26 years in the steel. The senior submariner on that entire waterfront, and the only person on the pier who did not need anyone to know it. She had walked the pier in a windbreaker. The narration tells you now and only now, because the woman who needed the uniform to be obeyed had drowned a little in 2014 and come back up someone harder and quieter and far more patient than the sea had counted on. Winter 2014. She had been 36, the engineer officer, the department head who owned the back of the boat, running deep on a transit in cold black water. It came without warning, the way it does. A seawater piping rupture in the engine room, high pressure, the ocean coming in through a wound in the boat at a rate the mind refuses to hold. Alarms, the deck taking an angle, the boat growing heavy in a way that every submariner feels in the soles of their feet before any gauge confirms it. Heavy and getting heavier, and the bottom a long, long way down. She had run it from aft, from the throttles, with the water rising over her boots and then over her shins. Isolate the casualty. Get the bound on it. Drive for the surface before the boat got too heavy to answer. Isolate the casualty, she had said, and her voice had not risen, because a risen voice in a flooding space buys you nothing and costs you everyone. Emergency blow. Drive her up, now! They had driven her up. High-pressure air into the tanks, a full bell, the planes for the surface, the whole crew doing the 100 exact things that stand between a submarine and the bottom. And in the worst of it, in the flooding space itself, a 19-year-old machinist's mate named Danny Okafor had stayed at his station to seat the last isolation valve by hand, because the valve was what would save the boat, and the valve would not seat itself. She had given the order to seal the space. That was the part she carried. In a flooding casualty, there comes a moment when the only way to save the boat is to shut a watertight door. And shutting it means deciding who is on which side of it. She had not known in that second exactly where every man was. She had known only that the boat was dying and that the bound had to be made. She had ordered the space sealed, and somewhere on the far side of the order, a 19-year-old had chosen to stay at a valve instead of running for the door. He got it shut. The flooding stopped at the bound he made. The boat came up, broke the surface into a winter night, took a hard roll, and lived. Every soul aboard lived, except the one who had made them all live. They got to Danny Okafor too late. The space had taken him while the valve he seated was busy saving everyone else. She had carried that valve in her hands ever since, in the way that matters. The Navy had given her the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for that night, for the boat she saved and the crew she brought home, and she had stood at the ceremony and let them pin it on her, and thought, the entire time, about the one name that should have been read first. Command had come after. A boat of her own. The Legion of Merit. The Dolphins gone from silver bright to the dull gold of longwear. Rank, and then more rank, until this morning, and this pier, and this chief. This was why she was calm. Not because the morning was small, though it was. Because she had already met, face to face, in cold, rising water, the only adversary that had ever truly frightened her. And it had not been a man with anchors on his collar and a large opinion of his own deck. It had been the sea, patient and indifferent and stronger than all of them. And she had looked at it across a flooding space and not flinched, and she had brought her people up. A chief who could not read a manifest did not frighten her. A chief who could not read her did not even interest her, except as a hazard to a good boat, the way the chafing cable was a hazard, the way the open holster was a hazard. In her memory, she set Okafor's name where she always set it. First, before her own, before her rank, before her ribbons, before the orders folded in the bag across the base. And on the pier, in the present, behind a line of paint, Captain Tessa Halverson lifted her chin 1/4 of an inch and let the morning come. The trap, which Chief Stroud could not see, because he had decided there was nothing to see, was now fully set. He had built it himself. All it needed was for him to take the last step. He took it because he ran out of patience, which men like him always do. Up the pier, in the distance, the official party was forming. Covers and summer whites catching the sun. A small motorcade easing to a stop at the head of the waterfront. The unmistakable shape of brass arriving. Stroud saw it and wanted the woman gone before any of it reached his brow. A loose civilian on the pier during a change of command made the watch look bad, made him look bad, and he had spent the whole morning making sure it was her who looked bad, and not him. So he crossed to the line, and he put his hands on her. He gripped her upper arm. He grabbed the strap of her bag with his other hand, and hauled, half turning her, moving her bodily back from the painted stripe toward the length of the pier. "I told you," he said. "Tight now. The performance gone. Only the temper left. You don't listen. Let's go. Off the pier. Now." She did not resist. She did not pull away. She did not flinch. She let him grip her arm, and in the half-second his hand closed, she read the angle of his wrist, and the set of his feet, and the faces of every witness on the topside. The seaman, the petty officer, Calloway's head appearing again at the hatch, Quinto coming up the brow with a folder in his hand. And she let the boat see exactly what was being done to her, and by whom. The primary read, at full strength. She was not absorbing an insult now. She was collecting a fact in front of witnesses on a controlled pier, with a folder of his falsified logs already in the Master Chief's hand. "Chief!" Quinto's voice came across the topside like a round going off. "Hands off! Hands off her! Now!" Calloway was already moving down the brow, 2 steps at a time, the young officer's face white with the understanding that something had gone badly wrong on his watch, and that he had been turned away from it twice and should not have allowed it. There is a thing that happens to a trained body when a hand closes on it without permission, and it is not panic. The body inventories. It maps the grip and the balance and the distance and the exits, all of it at once, below thought, and it presents the conscious mind with a short list of what could be done and how fast. Tessa Halverson's body did all of that in the half-second the chief's hand closed on her arm, and then her conscious mind did the harder thing, the thing 26 years had taught her, which was to do none of it, to let him hold her arm, to let the boat watch him do it, to let the fact be made, clean and witnessed and undeniable, instead of trading it for the small and useless satisfaction of breaking his grip. The woman looked down at the chief's hand on her arm. Then she looked up, slowly, into his face. And for the first time in the entire morning, her expression changed. She smiled. It was a small smile, even and unhurried, and there was nothing warm in it at all. It was the smile of someone who had been handed the last thing she needed and was simply confirming receipt. "You're going to want to remember," she said quietly, "that you did that." Something in the way she said it reached even Stroud. His grip loosened a fraction. The party was close now. Very close. Covers and whites filling the head of the pier, and he let go of her arm and stepped back and straightened his uniform with both hands and turned to face the arriving brass, because rendering honors to senior officers was a thing he knew how to do, and being looked at like that by a woman in a windbreaker was not. He squared himself away at the head of his brow, certain the morning had swung back under his control, certain the worst of it was behind him. He did not understand. He had no way yet to understand that the woman he had just put his hands on and the reason the brass had come to his pier were one and the same person. Behind him, unhurried, the woman in the windbreaker bent and picked up her own bag. Commander Theo Albright came up the pier ahead of his wardroom in summer whites, scanning the brow for the one face he most needed to find and most dreaded, keeping waiting. He was 41, the boat's commanding officer, and this was the most important afternoon of his command, and his eyes swept the topside and the brow, and the chief squared away at the head of it, and then went past all of it to the woman standing behind the painted line on the pier with a bag in her hand. The blood went out of his face. "Ma'am?" he said. His voice did not carry the way a CO's voice is supposed to, Commodore Halverson. For one long beat, nobody on the pier moved. Stroud's head turned. He looked at his commanding officer, who had stopped dead and gone white, and was staring not at him, not at the brow, but at the contractor behind the line. He looked at the woman. He looked back at his CO. The first thing on his face was confusion, pure and uncomprehending. Why was the commander looking at the tour lady like that? The topside watch had already passed the word below, because a watch that has just heard its CO name a Commodore on the pier does the one thing it is trained to do. The one MC speaker on the sail crackled. 2 bells rang out across the water, clear and hard and formal, the sound that announces the arrival of a senior officer to a ship. "Submarine Squadron 8, the one MC announced, flat and enormous in the morning air. "Arriving." The quarterdeck came to attention. Every sailor topside snapped to. Calloway, halfway down the brow, came to attention where he stood. The seaman with the holster, the petty officer. Down the pier, the official party halted and squared away. Commander Albright stepped to the painted line, came to attention, and brought his hand up in the first salute. Sharp, exact. The salute a commanding officer renders to the officer who now sits above him in his entire chain of command. "Commodore," Albright said. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. My apologies. We had you on the brow at 1300. I didn't know you'd come early." And on Chief Dale Stroud's face, the audience watched the whole thing happen in order. Confusion first. The CO is saluting the contractor. Why is the CO saluting the contractor? Then disbelief, a hard refusal, the mind reaching for any other explanation and finding none. Then the slow, sick recognition as the morning replayed itself behind his eyes. The windbreaker, the inward-turned watch, the 4 flat sentences that read his boat from behind a line, the exact words she had used, request permission to come aboard, the weapons shipping hatch, the one MC, the words a contractor does not know. And then the last thing, the part that would not leave him for a long time, as his eyes dropped to the access log still in his own hand, and he understood precisely what he had signed, and waved aboard, and put his hands on. The salute held in the morning air, and it changed the whole pier. A salute is a small thing, and an enormous thing at once. A hand brought to a brow, but rendered by a commanding officer to the woman a chief had spent a morning waving behind a line. It rearranged every fact that had been allowed to stand all day. The contractor was a captain. The tour lady was the senior submariner on the waterfront. The lost civilian was the one person on that pier whose name now sat above every officer aboard. She returned the salute. Then Captain Tessa Halverson stepped over the painted line at last, onto the controlled space of the pier, and she did not raise her voice, because she had never once in this story needed to. "Commander," she said to Albright, "good boat. Bad morning. We'll fix the second part." Her eyes went to Quinto, the folder in his hand. "Master Chief." "Commodore," Quinto said, and there was something in how he said it that was almost relief. She named it then, all of it, in the flat brevity of command, not as grievance, not as a wounded woman settling a score, but as fact, the way she had named the chain and the cable that morning. An unscreened van waved across the brow. A working party logged as checked that no one checked. A topside access log signed on nothing, against a manifest the chief had been asked twice to verify and twice refused, and a chief petty officer who had put his hands on a senior officer on a federal pier in front of his own watch. "Master Chief, relieve the watch," she said. "Chief Stroud is to be escorted off my pier. Hold every page he signed this morning. Nothing in that log gets corrected, amended, or thrown away. It gets held, exactly as it is, for the investigation." Across the pier, 2 base security personnel were finally hurrying toward the brow, the escort Stroud had called for himself hours ago, to remove a troublesome civilian. Quinto turned and pointed them with one steady finger, not at the woman who had stood behind the line all morning, but at the chief. What came after came fast, the way these things do once the first restraint is removed. The held logs told the story Stroud had been writing all along, only now somebody was finally reading it. The morning's unscreened access was not a single lapse, it was a habit. When the investigators laid his topside logs beside the manifests for the preceding weeks, the pattern stood up on its own. Visitors waved across on his say-so and logged as screened, entries initialed in advance. Juniors leaned on to look the other way and to sign things they hadn't seen because the chief had said to. A working party would later admit, quietly, that the open holster and the unchecked van were ordinary Tuesdays on Stroud's brow. The hardest part for the people who knew him was how ordinary it had all been. There had been no single villainous act, no dramatic betrayal, only 1,000 small conveniences, each one defended with the same line, "I've got it. I've been doing this longer than you." That was how a watch rotted, not in one night. In a slow accumulation of corners cut by a man who had confused his seniority for his judgment, until the morning a senior officer walked the full length of his pier in a windbreaker and watched him cut every one of them in a row. He was relieved for cause that afternoon, his clearance suspended, his access to the waterfront pulled, the matter referred for court-martial. It was not vengeance. Captain Halverson never once treated it as vengeance, and that was the thing that unsettled the people who watched her do it. It was procedure. A hazard had been identified on a good boat, the way a chafing cable is identified, and it was isolated, and the boat was made right. The chief had simply turned out to be one of the hazards. The boat was made right in other ways, too. The cable that had chafed all morning across the forward cleat was reled by a work party before the ceremony, the way she had flagged it the first time she opened her mouth. The brow chain stayed on its stanchion. The holster stayed snapped. There was a redemption in it, the way there usually is if you watch for the people who tried. Lieutenant Junior Grade Wes Calloway, the young officer of the deck who had put his head up twice that morning and been turned back twice by a chief who had no right to turn him back. Calloway was the one the new Commodore had briefed the corrected access procedure to the afternoon watch section. Not punished for the morning, trusted with the fix. She gave him the standard instead of the blame, and a young officer who might have learned the wrong lesson from the day learned the right one instead. And to Quinto, The Master Chief who had seen her first, who had read the boat the way she read it, and had gone to find the truth himself. When his chief would not, she gave a single line, quietly, on the topside, with no one else close enough to hear. "You read the boat before you read the man, Master Chief," she said. "That's the whole job. Most people get it backwards their entire careers." Quinto had 30 years and a chest of ribbons, and that one sentence landed on him like a medal. The satisfaction in a story like this one was never really the chief's downfall. His downfall was only procedure, only a hazard isolated. The satisfaction, the thing worth staying 800 feet of pier and a whole hard morning for, was watching the institution finally recognize one of its own, quietly, correctly, the way it is supposed to. 2 bells, a salute rendered in the right direction, a deck come to attention for the right person at last. If that landed for you, subscribe to Honor Tales, because there is a sailor like her in every one of these stories. Someone the world had already decided to overlook, standing patiently behind a line, waiting for the morning to learn its mistake. Evening came down over the waterfront. The ceremony was long done, the bunting taken in, the official party gone, the pier empty to the ordinary quiet of a boat at rest. Captain Tessa Halverson, in uniform now, gold dolphins dull and certain on her chest, stood alone on the topside of her squadron's boat in the last of the light. She laid a flat hand on the cool steel of the hull. The metal held the day's warmth, and underneath it, the old, deeper cold of the water it was built to go down into. She thought, the way she always did when her hand was on a hull at the end of a day, about a 19-year-old who had seated a valve by hand in a flooding space so that everyone else could come up. She said his name once, aloud, to the steel and the dark water, and no one else. Okafor. A pause, and then, softer, the old promise she made to the steel every time. Still first. Her phone buzzed against her hip. She took it out. A message from an old shipmate, a man she had stood watches with a lifetime ago, and who had a boat of his own now, and a course that did not appear on any public chart. Commander Reza Kalani. The greeting was the old coded one, the one only the two of them used, and under it a single line. "Cold water tomorrow, skipper." Same as the old days. R. She read it twice. Below the words, she knew the shape of it. A boat slipping its lines in the dark, running quiet, turning her bow toward the gray, and the ice, and the long, patient cold of the high north, the way they had done in the days when she had been the one going down into it. There was a younger version of her that would have answered it in a heartbeat, that would have given anything to be the one slipping the lines in the dark and turning for the cold. That version wasn't gone. She had simply learned what the cold cost and what it took and who it kept, and she carried all of that now in the same hands that had once run a flooding space from the throttles. The pull was real. It would always be real. It was the same pull that had made her, at 22, raise her hand and ask for the steel when the community had barely opened its door to women, and it had not loosened its grip on her in 26 years. She read the message, and she let herself feel the pull of it for exactly one breath, and then she put the phone away. She looked out past the breakwater, past the last lights of the pier, to the open black water, where the cold went all the way to the bottom, and a boat could disappear, and a sailor could earn every fathom of it the hard way, the only way it was ever really earned. Her hand was still on the hull. The water waited, north of everything, the way it always had. And Captain Tessa Halverson, who had once gone down into it and brought her people back up, stood her watch in the dark a little longer and set her course. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.